Commander Zelthon stood before the observation window of his flagship, watching the small blue planet rotate slowly in the darkness of space. His three eyes focused on the white clouds swirling across the surface, and his scaled fingers tapped against the metal railing. Behind him, Science Officer Kravith worked at his station, analyzing data streams that poured in from their surveillance equipment. The Vakrian Empire had been watching this world for almost 2 months now, and everything they discovered made Zelthon more confused. Earth was the name the inhabitants called their planet. It was rich in resources, had abundant water, and possessed a thriving biosphere that would be valuable to the Empire. The dominant species called themselves humans, and they had recently achieved primitive spaceflight. They had landed on their own moon decades ago, but had barely ventured beyond that. Their technology was crude by galactic standards, still relying on chemical combustion for most of their energy needs. They had split the atom and created basic computers, but they were centuries behind even the least advanced members of the Galactic Council. What troubled Zelthon was not what Earth had, but what it did not have. His tactical officer had compiled a complete military assessment of the planet, and the report was baffling. Earth possessed no orbital defense platforms of any kind. There were no weapons satellites circling the planet, no energy shields protecting the atmosphere, and no fleet of warships ready to defend their home. The humans had sent a few small probes and telescopes into orbit, along with communication satellites, but nothing that could be considered a defensive installation. Kravith approached with a data tablet in his clawed hands. The science officer's head tendrils swayed slightly as he moved, a sign of his puzzlement. He handed the tablet to Zelthon and pointed at the display with one thin finger. The screen showed a map of Earth with thousands of red markers scattered across every continent. Each marker represented a military installation, army base, or weapons stockpile that their scans had detected. The strange part was how these military forces were arranged. Instead of uniting against external threats, the humans had divided themselves into separate nations, and these nations maintained armies that faced each other. Their weapons were pointed at fellow humans, not at the stars. Zelthon had watched their information networks and learned that these nations had fought countless wars throughout their history. Even now, in several regions, humans were actively killing other humans in territorial disputes and ideological conflicts. Every other spacefaring civilization the Vakrian Empire had encountered followed a predictable pattern. Once a species achieved the ability to leave their planet, they inevitably unified their homeworld and turned their attention outward. They built defenses against external threats, established early warning systems, and prepared for the reality of a dangerous galaxy. Some species were peaceful and built their defenses reluctantly. Others were aggressive and built massive fleets. But all of them understood the basic logic of survival in a universe filled with other civilizations. Humans seemed to have missed this fundamental step. They had the technology to build orbital defenses, but had not done so. They had the industrial capacity to construct a fleet, but had instead built weapons to use against each other. Their planet sat in space like an unguarded treasure chest, apparently inviting anyone with the means to simply take it. Zelthon turned away from the window and walked to the command center of the bridge. His boots clicked against the metal floor as he moved. Around him, dozens of Vakrian officers worked at their stations, monitoring Earth's communications, tracking military movements, and analyzing technological capabilities. The flagship was equipped with the most advanced stealth technology in the Empire, rendering it invisible to Earth's primitive detection systems. The humans had no idea they were being watched. The Vakrian Military Council was eager to proceed with the invasion. They had already begun assembling the fleet, pulling warships from 3 different sectors to form an overwhelming force. The Council saw Earth as an easy conquest, a world that could be taken quickly with minimal losses. The resources alone would justify the expedition, but there was also the strategic value of claiming a planet in this region of space. Earth's star system was positioned along a valuable trade route that could benefit the Empire greatly. But Zelthon had fought in 12 conquest campaigns over his long military career, and his instincts told him something was wrong. He had learned to trust those instincts because they had saved his life more than once. A planet this valuable should not be this vulnerable. In nature, the most desirable resources were always the most heavily guarded. Fruit trees developed thorns. Valuable minerals formed in dangerous locations, and prey animals evolved defensive capabilities. Yet Earth sat defenseless in the void. He pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's communication networks. The humans had a global information system they called the Internet, and it was remarkably sophisticated for their level of development. They used it to share information, conduct commerce, and communicate across vast distances instantly. Zelthon had assigned a team to monitor these communications, and what they found was both fascinating and disturbing. Humans were aware of the possibility of alien life. Their entertainment media was filled with stories about creatures from other worlds, some friendly and some hostile. They had scientists actively searching for signals from space, listening to the stars with radio telescopes. Some humans believed that aliens had already visited Earth in ancient times. Others thought intelligent life was rare and that humanity was alone in the universe. But none of them seemed to consider that they might be in danger. Their military forces prepared for wars against each other, not against unknown threats from space. Their weapons were designed to fight other humans. Their strategies and tactics were based on centuries of human against human combat. Even their most powerful weapons, the nuclear devices that could devastate entire cities, were aimed at each other in a doctrine they called mutually assured destruction. Kravith returned to his station and called up another display. This one showed Earth's population distribution. Over 7 billion humans lived on the planet, concentrated in massive cities and spread across 7 continents. They had adapted to nearly every environment on their world, from frozen polar regions to scorching deserts. They grew food using agriculture, and had developed complex distribution systems to feed their population. Their civilization was fragile in some ways, dependent on technology and infrastructure that could be easily disrupted, but it was also remarkably widespread. Zelthon studied the data for several more hours, reading reports and watching video feeds from Earth's surface. He saw humans going about their daily lives, completely unaware that their world was being evaluated as a target for conquest. In a city called Seattle, a construction worker named Pete Davis operated heavy machinery, building structures that would likely be destroyed in the coming invasion. In Boston, a teacher named Amy Richardson stood before a classroom of young humans, educating them about their planet's history, unaware that their future was being decided in orbit above them. At a remote military facility in a desert region of North America, Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat at a monitoring station, staring at sensor readings. Beside him, Dr. Lisa Campbell analyzed data from their deep space tracking system. For a moment, their equipment registered an unusual gravitational anomaly, a slight distortion that could indicate a massive object in high orbit. Jake pointed it out to Lisa, and they both studied the reading carefully. But the signal was weak and disappeared quickly, so they marked it as a probable sensor error and continued with their routine work. Jake never realized he had just detected the Vakrian flagship. The stealth system had flickered for a fraction of a second, enough to create a tiny ripple in local spacetime. Lisa recorded the anomaly in their log, but did not consider it significant enough to report to their commanding officer, Colonel Henry Barnes. The colonel had more important concerns than phantom sensor readings. He was too busy preparing for potential conflicts with other human nations. Zelthon made his decision. He would order extended surveillance before recommending any military action. Something about this situation demanded caution and careful study. He instructed Kravith to expand their monitoring operations and to compile detailed analyses of human biology, psychology, and culture. If the Vakrian Empire was going to invade Earth, they needed to understand what they were really facing. The commander returned to the observation window and looked down at the blue planet. Somewhere down there, billions of humans lived their lives in peace and conflict, completely unaware that their world had attracted the attention of an empire that had conquered 47 star systems. They continued their petty wars and small concerns, never looking up at the stars with appropriate fear. Their planet remained undefended, exposed, and vulnerable, yet something in Zelthon's experienced mind whispered a warning. He had survived this long by listening to that inner voice, and it was telling him that Earth's apparent weakness might be hiding something far more dangerous. He just did not know what it was yet. The mystery of the undefended planet would need to be solved before any invasion fleet crossed the line from O. 3 months of surveillance had passed, and the Vacrian Military Council had grown impatient with Zelthon's cautious approach. They reviewed his reports and dismissed his concerns as unnecessary hesitation. Earth remained undefended, the humans remained divided, and the Empire's resources were being wasted on observation when they could be taking action. The Council issued direct orders to proceed with the invasion, and Zelthon had no choice but to obey. 200 warships assembled at the edge of Earth's solar system, forming the largest invasion fleet the Vacrian Empire had deployed in 30 years. Zelthon stood on the bridge of his flagship as the fleet moved toward the blue planet. Each warship carried troops, weapons, and equipment designed to overwhelm any resistance. The battle plan was straightforward and had been used successfully on dozens of other worlds. The fleet would enter orbit, destroy any military installations that posed a threat, and land troops in major population centers. Once the humans saw the futility of resistance, they would surrender, and the occupation would begin. The entire operation was expected to take less than one standard cycle. As the fleet crossed into Earth's orbital space, alarms began sounding across the planet below. Human detection systems finally picked up the massive alien presence that could no longer hide. At military bases around the world, screens lit up with warnings. Radar systems showed objects that were far too large to be asteroids or satellites. Communication networks exploded with emergency transmissions as nations that had been enemies moments before suddenly shared information about the incoming threat. At the United Nations headquarters, President Claire Martinez of the United States addressed an emergency session. Leaders from every nation watched via video link as she called for immediate global unity. Her voice was steady despite the fear that gripped everyone in the room. She proposed that all military forces coordinate their response and that all resources be shared freely. The proposal was accepted within minutes, something that would have been impossible just hours earlier. Humanity faced extinction, and old grudges suddenly seemed meaningless. General Frank Patterson sat in a military command center deep underground, coordinating defensive efforts across North America. His screens showed troop movements, weapon deployments, and civilian evacuation routes. He knew with absolute certainty that conventional human weapons would be useless against technology that could cross the stars. Earth's missiles, tanks, and aircraft were primitive compared to what was coming. But he also knew that doing nothing was not an option. If humanity was going to die, they would die fighting. Jake Morrison and Lisa Campbell worked frantically at their facility in Nevada. Their equipment was now tracking the alien fleet with perfect clarity. Lisa had managed to isolate what she believed was a communication frequency used by the aliens. She configured their transmitter to send a basic mathematical sequence, hoping to establish some form of contact. For several hours there was no response. Then a voice came through their speakers, speaking in a language they had never heard before but somehow translated by alien technology. Commander Zelthon's image appeared on their screen, his 3 eyes staring at them with an expression they could not read. Through the translation system, he delivered his message. Humanity had one choice: surrender immediately or face complete destruction. Earth's military forces were to stand down, and world leaders were to submit to Vacrian authority. Resistance would be met with overwhelming force. The humans had 12 hours to comply. Lisa looked at Jake, and they both knew what the answer would be. She transmitted their response back to the alien commander. Humanity would never surrender. Jake added that if the Vacrians wanted Earth, they would have to take it, and it would cost them dearly. Zelthon's expression changed slightly, something that might have been surprise or confusion. He ended the transmission without another word. Within hours, something unexpected began happening across Earth. Instead of panic and chaos, a strange determination spread through the human population. News reporter Danny Lee broadcast continuously from New York, showing crowds of people who were not running or hiding but preparing to fight. The global internet became a massive coordination network. People shared information, organized resistance groups, and spread messages of defiance. Social media platforms that had been used for entertainment and argument suddenly became tools for survival. In Texas, a retired Marine named Sam Cooper gathered his neighbors in a community center. He was 70 years old, but he had fought in 3 wars during his military service. He knew how to organize people, how to create defensive positions, and how to make every bullet count. Within days, his small town had transformed into a fortress. Hunting rifles were distributed, Roadblocks were erected and everyone learned basic combat skills. Similar scenes played out in thousands of communities across the planet. A programmer named Kevin Wright led a group of hackers who attempted to breach the alien computer systems. They had no idea if it would work, but they tried anyway. Using the communication frequency that Lisa had discovered, they sent carefully crafted data packets designed to probe for vulnerabilities. Most of their attempts failed, but they learned something from each failure. Kevin coordinated with similar groups in Russia, China, Japan, and Europe. Collectively, they began to understand the basic structure of Vacrian computer networks. In Japan, an engineer named Nicole Turner examined debris from an alien scout ship that had crashed in the Pacific Ocean. Japanese military forces had recovered the wreckage and brought it to her research facility. She carefully took apart the alien technology, photographing every component and analyzing every material. The power systems were far beyond human understanding, but the basic mechanical principles were similar. She realized that with enough time and effort, humans could learn to reverse engineer at least some of this technology. The Vacrian fleet began its assault on major cities. Warships descended through the atmosphere, their weapons charging. In New York City, beams of energy lanced down from the sky, destroying military installations and government buildings. But something strange happened. Instead of fleeing in terror, humans began fighting back. An office worker named Greg Palmer was operating a construction crane when the aliens landed nearby. Without hesitation, he used the massive machine to crush an alien troop transport. He died seconds later when alien soldiers returned fire, but his action inspired others. A nurse named Linda Foster set up a makeshift hospital in a subway station beneath Manhattan. Wounded fighters were brought to her constantly. She had no proper medical supplies, no surgical equipment, and no assistance from any organized medical system. But she worked without stopping, using whatever materials she could find. When supplies ran out, volunteers risked their lives to get more. Linda saved dozens of lives in those first chaotic days, and her hospital became a symbol of human resilience. The pattern repeated in cities around the world. Moscow, Beijing, London, Paris, Mumbai, and Cairo all came under attack. In every location, humans refused to surrender. They fought with military weapons when they had them and with improvised weapons when they did not. The Vacrian troops encountered resistance unlike anything in their experience. Enemy soldiers who should have retreated instead held their ground. Civilians who should have fled instead attacked. Wounded humans who should have surrendered instead kept fighting. Zelthan received battlefield reports that made no sense. His troops had superior weapons, superior armor, and superior technology, yet they were struggling to secure even small sections of the cities they attacked. Human resistance was not organized or efficient, but it was absolutely relentless. Vacrian soldiers reported that humans would sacrifice themselves to destroy a single enemy soldier. Groups of civilians would attack armored vehicles with nothing but crude explosives and determination. Krevith analyzed combat recordings, trying to understand what they were seeing. He noticed that humans displayed behavior that seemed irrational from a military standpoint. They protected strangers at the cost of their own lives. They refused to abandon positions even when defeat was certain. They regrouped and counterattacked after suffering casualties that would have broken any other species. Most disturbing, they showed no fear of death when fighting for their home. In Africa, a former soldier named Joseph Kane organized guerrilla operations in the dense forests. He had grown up hunting in these regions and knew every trail and hiding spot. He taught local civilians how to set ambushes, how to strike quickly and disappear, and how to make the aliens pay for every meter of ground they took. His tactics were copied by resistance groups across the continent. In Australia, a pilot named Emma Clark did something that shocked both humans and aliens. She managed to board a damaged Vacrian fighter craft that had crashed in the outback. Using her knowledge of human aircraft and a complete disregard for safety, she figured out the basic controls and actually got the alien craft into the air. Her flight lasted only minutes before she crashed again, but she proved that human adaptability was extraordinary. 6 months into the invasion, Zelthan studied strategic maps that showed the Vacrian Empire controlled less than 15% of Earth's surface. Even that control was constantly challenged by human resistance. The invasion had been running for 8 months, and Zelthan barely recognized the conflict anymore. What was supposed to be a simple conquest had transformed into something that defied all military logic. He sat in his command chamber reviewing the latest casualty reports, and the numbers told a story that the Vakrian Military Council refused to accept. They had lost 43 warships, thousands of soldiers, and control of territories they had initially secured. The humans were not just resisting anymore, they were winning. Kravith entered the chamber carrying multiple data tablets, his head tendrils trembling with what Zelthon now recognized as stress. The science officer had spent months studying human biology, culture, and history, and each discovery had been more disturbing than the last. He placed the tablets on the table and began his presentation with a simple statement that changed everything. Humans were not a normal species. They had evolved on what galactic biologists classified as a death world, and that evolution had created something that should not exist. Earth was a planet of extremes. Its axial tilt created dramatic seasonal changes. Its weather systems produced storms of incredible violence. Its tectonic plates shifted constantly, causing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Diseases swept through populations regularly. Predators hunted humans throughout their evolutionary history. The planet itself seemed designed to kill anything living on it, yet humans had not just survived but thrived. Kravith explained that this environment had shaped human biology in ways that made them perfect survivors. Human endurance was extraordinary. They could run for hours without stopping, tracking prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Their ability to sweat allowed them to regulate body temperature better than almost any other species. They could survive injuries that would kill most creatures. Broken bones healed, damaged organs regenerated. Even catastrophic blood loss could be survived if treatment came quickly enough. Their immune systems fought off diseases and adapted to new threats constantly. But the physical adaptations were only part of the picture. Kravith showed Zelton historical records that humans themselves had compiled. Their species had survived ice ages that covered most of their planet in frozen wasteland. They had endured volcanic eruptions that blocked out their sun for years. They had lived through pandemics that killed significant portions of their population. Each time they recovered and rebuilt. The concept of permanent defeat seemed to be absent from their psychology. More troubling was their relationship with warfare. Humans had been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. Every advancement in their civilization had been accompanied by advancements in their ability to kill. They had invented thousands of different weapons, developed countless tactical doctrines, and refined the art of combat over millennia. The Vakrians had superior technology, but humans had something more valuable: experience. They understood war at a fundamental level that came from living it constantly. Zelthon watched video footage from ground operations. In one recording, Vakrian troops had cornered a group of humans in a collapsed building. The logical response would have been surrender, but instead the humans fought until every one of them was dead. They used debris as weapons, created traps from rubble, and refused to stop even when wounded. One human female continued fighting after losing an arm, using her remaining hand to detonate an explosive that killed 3 Vakrian soldiers. Another recording showed a human child, no more than 10 years old, leading a group of adults through destroyed city streets. The child had memorized safe routes through the rubble and knew where alien patrols moved. When asked later why she helped, the child simply said she wanted to protect her home. That attitude appeared universal. Humans of all ages, from children to the elderly, participated in resistance efforts. The concept of non-combatants seemed foreign to them when their world was threatened. Back on Earth, Jake Morrison had become a key figure in the human resistance. His military facility in Nevada had survived the initial attacks and had become a coordination center for operations across North America. He worked closely with Lisa Campbell, who had proven to be invaluable in understanding alien communications. Together they had intercepted Vakrian battle plans, decoded enemy transmissions, and shared that intelligence with resistance groups worldwide. Colonel Barnes coordinated guerrilla operations that were bleeding the Vakrian forces dry. His tactics were simple but effective. Never face the enemy in open battle. Strike supply lines. Destroy isolated outposts. Make them afraid to leave their fortified positions. Each attack taught human fighters more about alien weaknesses. They learned that Vakrian armor had vulnerable joints. They discovered that certain human weapons could penetrate alien shields if used correctly. They found that Vakrian night vision was poor, making darkness a human advantage. In Africa, Joseph Kane had become a legend among the resistance. His guerrilla fighters had destroyed dozens of alien supply convoys and had never lost a direct engagement. He taught his tactics to others through the internet, and resistance groups on other continents copied his methods. The aliens controlled the cities, but they could not control the wilderness, and humans used that to their advantage. Tyler Bennett led a team of hackers who had achieved something remarkable. They had successfully breached Vacrian computer networks and had begun inserting viruses and false data. The aliens' logistical systems started malfunctioning. Supply shipments arrived at wrong locations. Communication channels filled with interference. Troop movements became uncoordinated. The hackers could not shut down alien systems entirely, but they could make everything harder and slower. Emma Clark had crashed her stolen alien fighter months ago, but before she did, she had documented everything about its operation. Engineers studied her notes and began to understand the basic principles of Vacrian flight systems. A team led by a scientist named Rachel Moore discovered something crucial. Earth's atmosphere contained nitrogen oxide compounds in concentrations that were toxic to Vacrian biology. Short exposure caused no problems, but prolonged time on Earth's surface was slowly poisoning the alien troops. This information spread through the resistance networks within hours. Suddenly, human tactics changed. Instead of trying to defeat the aliens quickly, resistance groups focused on making them stay on the ground as long as possible. Battles became deliberately prolonged. Supply lines were hit repeatedly, forcing aliens to spend more time outside their ships. The planet itself had become a weapon, and humans learned to use it. Marcus Bell was an engineer who had been working in Detroit when the invasion began. He survived the initial attacks and found himself with access to captured Vacrian plasma rifles. The weapons were useless without ammunition, but Marcus refused to accept that limitation. He took apart the rifles, analyzed how they functioned, and figured out how to manufacture compatible power cells using Earth materials. The process was crude and dangerous, but it worked. Humans could now use alien weapons, and that changed the balance of every fight. Dr. Helen Price led a team of scientists who were reverse engineering Vacrian shield technology. The process was slow because the aliens used principles of physics that humans barely understood. But Helen and her team worked without stopping, testing theories and building prototypes. After 6 months, they created a functioning shield generator. It was massive, inefficient, and consumed enormous amounts of power, but it worked. The technology was still years away from being practical. But the fact that humans could replicate it at all shocked the Vacrians. Zelthon read reports about all these developments, and each one deepened his growing sense of doom. The humans were doing what should be impossible. They were learning alien technology in months, adapting to new forms of warfare instantly, and refusing to break no matter how much pressure was applied. Krevith had tried to find a historical parallel in the galactic databases and found nothing. No species had ever resisted this effectively, this relentlessly, or this successfully. The science officer presented one final piece of analysis that made everything clear. He had studied human cultural records, their literature, their history, and their psychology. He found a concept that appeared repeatedly across all human societies and time periods. They had various names for it in different languages, but the meaning was always the same. Humans valued freedom above life itself. They would rather die than be enslaved. More than that, they believed that making their enemies pay dearly for victory was worthwhile even if victory was inevitable. Kravith called it spite, though the translation was imperfect. Humans would burn their own world rather than surrender it intact. They would fight until every last person was dead rather than submit to foreign rule. They did not make rational calculations about the cost of resistance versus the cost of surrender. They simply refused to accept conquest, and that refusal was absolute. Zelthon ran a simulation based on 8 months of combat data. He input every variable they had learned about human resistance, adaptation rates, and determination. The computer projected that fully conquering Earth would require an additional 20 years of continuous warfare. The cost would be 70% of the invasion force, resources that would bankrupt the Empire, and permanent guerrilla resistance even after NICU. 1 year had passed since the Vacrian fleet entered Earth's orbit, and the invasion had become a nightmare that refused to end. Zelthon studied the tactical map projected above his command table, and the image told a story of failure that could no longer be denied. Red zones marked areas under Vacrian control, but those zones had shrunk to barely 12% of Earth's surface. Blue zones showed human-controlled territory, and they dominated the map. Worst of all were the purple zones, contested areas where fighting never stopped and neither side could claim victory. The Vakrian Military Council demanded answers, but Zelthon had none that they wanted to hear. His forces were not being defeated in any single great battle. Instead, they were being worn down by 1,000 small defeats. Every day brought news of another supply convoy destroyed, another outpost overrun, another patrol ambushed. The humans had learned that they could not win through strength, so they won through persistence. They fought constantly, relentlessly, without pause or mercy. Krevith brought news that made the situation even worse. Human forces were now using captured Vakrian weapons effectively, and not just the simple plasma rifles. They had learned to operate alien vehicles, communications equipment, and even basic shield generators. More disturbing, they were manufacturing their own versions of some alien technologies. The copies were crude and often failed, but they worked well enough to be dangerous. Human engineers had studied every piece of wreckage, every disabled vehicle, and every abandoned piece of equipment. They learned through observation, experimentation, and a complete willingness to risk their lives testing theories. Marcus Bell had become famous among both humans and Vakrians. His workshops produced power cells for alien weapons, and resistance fighters across the planet used them. The Vakrians had tried to kill him multiple times, sending assassination teams and orbital strikes at his known locations. But Marcus moved constantly, sharing his knowledge freely and teaching others his methods. Even if they killed him, dozens of people now knew what he knew. The knowledge could not be destroyed. Dr. Helen Price had made a breakthrough that changed everything. Her team successfully created portable shield generators that soldiers could carry. The shields lasted only minutes before their power cells burned out, but those minutes could mean the difference between life and death. Human fighters began wearing these shields into combat, and suddenly Vakrian weapons were not the overwhelming advantage they once were. Helen's work proved that humans could not only understand alien technology, but improve upon it with their own innovations. A turning point came from an unexpected source. Captain Roger Hayes was a naval officer who commanded a destroyer before the invasion. His ship had been destroyed in the first week of fighting, but he survived and joined the resistance. For months he studied Vakrian orbital operations, learning their patrol patterns and weaknesses. He assembled a team of specialists, including former astronaut Julie Carter, who had piloted spacecraft before the aliens arrived. Their plan was insane, but that had never stopped humans before. They captured a Vakrian shuttle during a raid on a ground base. Julie studied the controls for 2 days, barely sleeping, teaching herself to fly an alien spacecraft through trial and error. The team included Chris Sanders, a demolitions expert who understood explosives better than anyone alive, and Paul Stevens, a linguist who had learned enough of the Vakrian language to read their computer systems. Together, these 4 humans planned to attack a Vakrian command ship in orbit. The mission should have been suicide. They flew the stolen shuttle toward the command ship, using codes they had extracted from captured equipment. The Vakrians almost detected the deception, but Julie's piloting skills got them past the outer defenses. They docked with the massive ship and fought their way through corridors filled with alien soldiers. Chris placed explosive charges throughout the vessel, while Paul downloaded data from their computer networks. Roger led the fighting using captured weapons and borrowed shields. They succeeded in ways that shocked everyone. The charges detonated perfectly, destroying the ship's main reactor. The massive vessel lost power and began falling toward Earth. The human team barely escaped in their shuttle as the command ship entered the atmosphere and broke apart. It crashed into the Pacific Ocean, killing everyone aboard and dealing the Vakrians a devastating blow. The victory proved that humans could strike at the aliens anywhere, even in the supposed safety of orbital space. But the human victories came at terrible cost. Entire cities lay in ruins. Tokyo, New York, London, and dozens of other major population centers were destroyed. Millions had died in the fighting. Infrastructure that took centuries to build was reduced to rubble. Farmland was poisoned by alien weapons. Supply chains collapsed. Disease spread through refugee camps. Earth was winning the war but losing everything in the process. Amy Richardson, the teacher from Boston, no longer taught children in classrooms. She ran an underground network that moved refugees from war zones to safer areas. She had seen more death in 1 year than most people witnessed in a lifetime. Her city was gone, destroyed in the early days of the invasion, but she survived and chose to help others survive. She moved through ruins and wreckage, guiding families to shelters and finding food where none seemed to exist. She represented millions of humans who fought not with weapons but with compassion and stubborn refusal to abandon each other. Pete Davis, the construction worker from Seattle, used his skills to build defensive fortifications. His city still stood, though damaged, and he worked to keep it that way. He taught others how to create barriers from rubble, how to shore up damaged buildings, and how to construct underground shelters. His work saved countless lives during alien bombardments. He never considered himself a hero, just a man doing what needed to be done. Zelthon received intelligence that disturbed him more than any military defeat. His analysts had studied human communications and found something they did not expect. Humans were not becoming demoralized by their losses. If anything, their determination was strengthening. Every destroyed city created more fighters. Every civilian death hardened the survivors' resolve. The Vakrians were trapped in a war where killing the enemy made them more dangerous, not less. Krevith presented another analysis that Zelthon found difficult to accept. He had studied human evolution and culture deeply, and he believed he understood something fundamental about their species. Humans had evolved as social creatures who formed strong emotional bonds. When those bonds were threatened, they responded with extreme aggression. The invasion had not just attacked human military forces. It had attacked their homes, their families, and their way of life. Every human now had personal reasons to fight, and those motivations were more powerful than any military discipline. The science officer showed recordings of human fighters discussing why they continued to resist. One soldier, wounded and exhausted, explained that he fought because the aliens had killed his family. A civilian who had taken up arms said she fought because she refused to let her children grow up as slaves. An elderly man who could barely walk insisted on helping the resistance because his grandchildren deserved a free world. These were not professional soldiers following orders. They were ordinary people who had been pushed beyond their breaking point and discovered they would rather die than submit. Sam Cooper, the retired Marine from Texas, had trained thousands of fighters in his region. His small town had become a fortress that the Vakrians could not capture. They had tried twice, sending large forces to crush the resistance there. Both times they were repelled with heavy losses. Sam's defenders used every trick he had learned in decades of military service, combined with intimate knowledge of their own territory. The Vakrians controlled the air, but humans controlled the ground, and that mattered more than the aliens realized. Joseph Kane in Africa had expanded his operations dramatically. His guerrilla fighters now operated across multiple countries, coordinating with other resistance groups and sharing intelligence. They had destroyed so many alien supply lines that some Vakrian outposts were running short on basic necessities. Joseph's tactics were copied worldwide, and the aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere, striking without warning and disappearing before reinforcements arrived. Kevin Wright and his international hacker collective had become a significant threat. They could not shut down Vakrian military systems, but they could degrade them constantly. False orders were inserted into communication networks. Navigation systems received corrupted data. Logistics computers reported incorrect inventory levels. The chaos was subtle but effective. Vakrian forces spent increasing amounts of time dealing with technical problems instead of fighting, and they never knew which system failures were natural and which were enemy action. Emma Clark had not flown again since her crash, but her documentation had enabled other pilots to train in captured alien craft. A squadron of human pilots now flew Vakrian fighters, attacking alien positions with their own technology. The psychological impact was devastating. Vakrian soldiers saw their own ships attacking them and faced the reality that humans could use any weapon they captured. Zelthon conducted another simulation, incorporating all the Ni. The Vakrian Military Council met an emergency session aboard the largest warship in their fleet. Zelthon stood before them, presenting his complete analysis of the Earth invasion. He showed them casualty figures that could no longer be hidden or minimized. He displayed strategic projections that made victory impossible. He explained in precise detail why continuing the war would destroy the Empire more effectively than any enemy could. The council members listened in silence, their expressions shifting from anger to disbelief to reluctant acceptance. The debate lasted for hours. Some council members argued for sending reinforcements and escalating the conflict. Others suggested using weapons of mass destruction to simply eliminate the human population. Zelthon countered each argument with cold facts. Reinforcements would only result in more casualties. Destroying Earth's biosphere would eliminate the resources they came to acquire. Most importantly, the Empire's other territories were becoming vulnerable because so much military strength was concentrated at Earth. They risked losing their entire empire to save pride. The final vote was narrow, but the decision was made. The Vakrian Empire would withdraw from Earth immediately. All ships would leave orbit within one standard cycle. Ground forces would be evacuated as quickly as possible. Any equipment that could not be recovered would be destroyed to prevent humans from acquiring more technology. It was the first time in Vakrian history that they had retreated from a conquest, and the shame burned in every council member's hearts. But the alternative was worse, and they knew it. Zelthon returned to his flagship and issued the withdrawal orders. Across Earth, Vakrian forces began pulling back from their positions. They destroyed supply depots, demolished their bases, and prepared for evacuation. Human resistance fighters watched in confusion at first, uncertain if this was a trick. But as days passed and more aliens departed, they began to understand. The impossible had happened. They had won. Before the fleet left entirely, Zelthon made one final decision. He requested a communication channel with human leadership. After some coordination through various networks, a meeting was arranged. Zelthon appeared via holographic transmission before a group of human representatives. Jake Morrison was there, along with Lisa Campbell, General Patterson, and President Martinez. The president had survived the war by moving constantly between secure locations, and she now spoke for a battered but unbroken humanity. Zelthon expected anger, demands for reparations, or threats of retaliation. What he received instead shocked him completely. Lisa Campbell spoke first, asking if diplomatic relations could be established. She suggested trade agreements that could benefit both civilizations. Jake Morrison asked if the Vakrians would be willing to share technical knowledge that could help rebuild Earth's damaged infrastructure. President Martinez proposed a formal peace treaty with provisions for future cooperation. The Vakrian commander struggled to understand this response. His species had invaded their world, killed millions of their people, and destroyed their cities. Yet the humans were willing to negotiate peace immediately, as if the war had never happened. Krevith, monitoring the conversation, explained quietly that this too was a human survival trait. They could shift from total war to cooperation with stunning speed. They held grudges but also understood the practical value of making allies from enemies. Zelthon agreed to limited technology exchange and formal diplomatic recognition. He promised that the Vakrian Empire would never again threaten Earth. He also agreed to provide the Galactic Council with a complete report on human capabilities, ensuring that no other civilization would make the mistake of attacking Earth. The meeting ended with what humans called a handshake agreement, though Zelthon had no hands to shake. The gesture's meaning was clear nonetheless. As the Vakrian fleet prepared for departure, Zelthon composed his final report on Earth. He described humanity as the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because of their technology or their numbers, but because of their psychology. They could not be defeated through conventional warfare. They could not be broken through attrition. They could not be intimidated by superior force. They survived everything their own planet threw at them and adapted to every threat. Most importantly, they would never surrender their freedom, no matter the cost. He updated the Galactic Council database with a formal warning that would be seen by every spacefaring civilization. Earth was designated as a protected world, not because of any treaty or alliance, but because attempting to conquer it was functionally suicidal. The report included detailed combat footage, casualty statistics, and psychological profiles. Any civilization that ignored this warning would do so at their own peril. The last Vakrian ship departed Earth's orbit 14 months after the invasion began. On the surface, humans emerged from shelters and hiding places to see clear skies for the first time in over a year. Celebrations broke out in cities around the world. People who had been enemies before the invasion embraced as allies. The shared struggle had united humanity in ways that peacetime never could, but the celebrations were brief. The real work of rebuilding began immediately. Colonel Barnes coordinated efforts to clear rubble from major cities. Engineers like Marcus Bell and Dr. Helen Price led teams that incorporated captured alien technology into reconstruction efforts. Buildings were rebuilt using hybrid construction methods that combined human and Vacrian techniques. Power systems were upgraded using alien energy principles that humans had learned to replicate. Pete Davis returned to construction work, but now he built with materials and methods that had not existed before the invasion. Seattle rose from its ruins stronger than before. Amy Richardson returned to teaching, but her curriculum now included lessons about humanity's place in a galactic community. Her students learned that Earth was not alone in the universe and that their species had proven itself capable of standing against any threat. Sam Cooper in Texas and Joseph Kane in Africa became advisors to a new global defense initiative. They helped establish training programs based on the tactics that had defeated the Vacrians. The goal was never to be unprepared again. Humanity would remain strong through the strength of its people, not through weapons platforms or space fleets. Every citizen would know how to defend their home if necessary. Kevin Wright and his hacker collective formed the core of Earth's new cybersecurity division. They continued studying alien computer systems using captured equipment and developed defenses against future technological threats. Emma Clark trained the first generation of human pilots who would eventually crew Earth's own spacecraft. The vessels were years away from completion, but the foundation was being laid. Jake Morrison and Lisa Campbell worked together at the newly formed Office of Extraterrestrial Relations. Their mission was to prepare Earth for future contact with alien civilizations. They studied the Vacrian technology that had been left behind and learned everything they could about galactic politics and culture. Tyler Bennett led the technical division, ensuring that Earth's computer networks could interface with alien systems when necessary. The Galactic Council took notice of Earth's victory. Diplomatic envoys from various civilizations made contact, offering trade agreements and alliances. Most came out of respect for human fighting capabilities. Some came out of fear. A few came out of genuine friendship. Earth began the slow process of joining the galactic community, though always on human terms. They would never again be vulnerable or isolated. Months after the Vacrian withdrawal, a merchant vessel from the Traders' Coalition approached Earth's solar system. The ship's captain was named Vrelk, and he was training a new navigator for long-distance routes. The navigator suggested a shortcut that would pass close to Earth, and Vrelk immediately rejected the idea. He pulled up the updated galactic database and showed the navigator Earth's entry. The planet was listed with the highest warning level. The entry described humans as the aggressive species capable of extreme violence when threatened. It noted their ability to adapt to any situation, their refusal to accept defeat, and their capacity for both destruction and cooperation. The report concluded with a simple statement that every spacefaring civilization now knew. Earth requires no orbital defenses because its inhabitants are defense enough. Approach with proper diplomatic protocols or do not approach at all. The navigator studied footage from the Vacrian invasion. Images showed burning cities, humans fighting with improvised weapons, and a species that simply would not break. The navigator asked why such a primitive world was so feared. Vrelk explained that technology could be acquired or stolen, but the human spirit could not be replicated. They had evolved on a world that tried to kill them constantly, and they responded by becoming unkillable themselves. Back on Earth, life continued with a new understanding of humanity's place in the cosmos. Cities rebuilt themselves using lessons learned from destruction. Scientists pushed the boundaries of what was possible by combining human innovation with alien knowledge. Children grew up knowing that their species had faced extinction and had won through sheer determination. The memory of the invasion would never fade, but it became a source of pride rather than trauma. Pete Davis worked on a construction project in Seattle, building a monument to those who died